Hey there folks, and welcome to the first of hopefully many Patreon Q&A sessions here on the Golden Bolt. I wanted to make this first video public for everyone to see, in part because the first question I'm going to address, and the one you've seen in the title already, is a question that I get asked many times, and I want to, on camera, personally address that, hopefully once and for all. I know that I'll get the question again in the future anyway, but I want to at least try. And also because this is another new perk that I plan on offering as I continue to revamp and adjust the Patreon page to give as much value as possible to those that do choose to be so generous with their support. So if you'd like to ask these sorts of Q&A styled questions about anything, you can do so over at the Patreon for just as little as $1 a month in support, and you'll get access to these Q&A threads as we do them most likely on a monthly basis. You'll get access to the Golden Bolt Discord server, where I'm frequently chatting with other patrons, friends of mine, other creators, and what have you, about videos and about the things that I'm working on or what I'm just playing. I'd like to institute, game nights or, hangout calls sometime soon down the road. And you'll also get early access to videos before they come out. So this first question is from Justin Gregoire. Hopefully I pronounced that name right. Let me know if I didn't. Should have asked beforehand. I forgot. Are there any plans to do a retrospective on the high-impact games Ratchet & Clank titles, or am I just focusing on the Insomniac releases? To answer this bluntly, yes, I am planning on covering Ratchet & Clank PSP, don't you worry. The reason that I didn't do Size Matters after Deadlocked, but before Tools of Destruction, in proper release order, is in part because I've been trying to tell the Insomniac games story as the story of Insomniac themselves, not just of the Ratchet & Clank games, but as the studio progressed through its career, for lack of a better term, through its lifespan, and got slowly but surely better and better at managing the process of developing these games, the crunch that they often had to do in the early games that has lessened as each game has gone on, how they've avoided burnout and turnaround, and just how they've proven that it can be done, even if it does take a while. I find that very valuable in the modern state of the games industry, and I want to highlight when that is possible and when it happens to show and hopefully push, developers to stand up for the fact that they don't need to crunch. So that's why I put them off in part, and also because I would have to do research into high-impact games separately from Insomniac, and that's a whole extra slew of research and trying to get interviews with developers and all of this extra work that I intend to do all at once for the PSP games. I want to make the PSP games one video. I don't know that that's going to happen, depending on how long each, game's part becomes, but I would like to do them as one lump video and address everything about their production all at once, as well as the production of the PS2 ports made by, again, a totally different studio from High Impact. I anticipate that I will get to them mid-2022, give or take, because I'm doing Ratchet & Clank alternating with other projects for the foreseeable future, rather than just doing only Ratchet & Clank, that I don't burn out on Ratchet & Clank. So it'll be a little while off, but it'll be worth it when we get there. And then Justin's other question regards, speaking of burnout, the project I burned out on that I was supposed to make before Tools of Destruction that I ended up scrapping and fast-tracking tools for a quicker production itself. And that was Ghost of Tsushima. I planned on covering that game, and I had announced it, and I was hoping that it would turn out well, and just I had scheduling conflicts that started making it hard for me to get a lot of work done before. I would have been in crunch mode, for lack of a better term, and then once I really got down to brass tacks, I wasn't really happy with how it was going. So I decided that with time running out before the DLC came out, I would put it off and do the DLC as part of the video rather than making a video that I wouldn't be happy with. But Justin's question is why I decided to review Ghost of Tsushima in the first place. And the answer to that is that while that game is, at its surface level, a paint-by-numbers, open-world Assassin's Creed / Ubisoft-styled game, when you really start looking at it at a deeper level, I found myself fascinated with how much it does to make old concepts new again. For example, they created such a gorgeous, vibrant world, and the thing that I love the most about that is that in doing that, they made sure with this wind mechanic, instead of having a mini-map, the wind would guide you to your objective. it made you focus on the environment that they created rather than focusing on the bottom left corner of your screen. You look at the game and you look at the world and you observe the environment. You observe all that work that goes into so many of these games that most people don't really stop to really truly take in. And I appreciated that, and I also appreciated that depending on how you play the game, there's an implicit karmic choice for how you, as the player, see Jin Sakai. So you can go and take on these Mongols and the bandits, and you can head people off honorably as a samurai and cut them down and make the game harder for yourself, but play honorably. Or you can go in stealthily, like the game suggests that you play as the ghost, and your version of Jin will struggle differently, not in terms of true narrative, but within your own mind as the player and the player character. Well, he'll struggle more or less with that concept of honor as the story progresses, and whether he can do it all himself in an honorable fashion or whether war has changed and therefore he must deal with it. And I find that and so many other things so fascinating, and I really want to dissect a lot of that. And I hope to do so in the future, down the road. I don't know when exactly. I'm not going to rush myself on it. I'm just going to kind of try and chip at it as I go, and hopefully it will come together. That'd be speaking of burnout, I have another question here from Even Luck, and he and I have talked about this once or twice before, I'm sure. But he asked here, how do I manage my time while producing these videos, and what is my method of avoiding or handling burnout? And the simple question is that I don't really tend to burn out. Ghost was the first time I properly burned out on it. And it was inevitable. I'm not upset that it happened. It's kind of part of this process and any creative field. It just kind of happens. So I accepted it. I rolled with the punches. I moved on to projects that I was more passionate about, which are tools. But really what it comes down to is that I do try to manage by having multiple projects in some form of production at the same time. So if I'm really not hitting it as far as like a writing perspective, if I'm not getting the flow down the way I want to, or I'm not really getting my thoughts onto the paper in a way that feels narratively cohesive, I'll go take a break and I'll record gameplay for the next project after that, or I'll do research, or I'll record ahead. So I recorded Tools of Destruction's gameplay back in April. Same with Quest for Booty. I recorded Ratchet 3 back in November of 2020, back when I was just going to review that game alone, and then it became this whole fucking massive project. I always work ahead to try and keep myself working on something, even if it's not the thing I should be working on imminently. That's mainly it, but also I'm kind of just a really good procrastinator, so I've been trying to teach myself over time to be better about that as these projects get larger in scope, and as more time is required to get them from start to finish, because while I can do it myself in 2 to 3 days if I really, really want to push myself to, A, it's not healthy, and B, I don't work alone anymore. Many of you will know by now that I work with my good friend Chris, also known as Beaconus Fan on YouTube. He edits and helps produce these videos with me. He'll normally take a chunk of it, and I'll take the rest, just because these are such big projects in scope. So, I don't want to affect his content approach, his schedule, or anything of that sort. So if it comes to it, I will delay a video to say, hey, I need to make sure that, friend and the person that I trust and pay to work on these videos with me, that he can do it in a healthy way. Even if that means that I myself have to crunch later, but I won't subject someone else to that, because that's not fair. And so I've gotten better at not procrastinating and, maybe cutting down the annoying, tedious work, but it really just is getting yourself down and working, even if it's just a little bit, get started on a project, because you'll find yourself getting enthralled into it if it's a project you're passionate about, and then the time just sloughs off. So yeah, I have a couple questions here that are kind of related. Well, there's two of the same question. Both, A Double asks, if Clank wasn't a robot, would that not be cool? And yes, by the transitive property, if Clank is a robot, therefore cool. Clank is not a robot, therefore he's not. That was the first question he had, and then Harry Baker also asked, on a scale of 1 to Clank is a robot, how badly do you think Sony screwed over the many PS3 exclusives that they shoved into stores and just forgot about? I want to keep this short because I will go for an hour on this if I don't restrain myself. And the short and sweet answer is that I think that the PS3 era, I will critique them and criticize them for sending out games like PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, Twisted Metal 12, Starhawk, all of the Vita in general, Resistance 3, all of their B-level projects were sent to die. Sly 4 is another great example, a game that was rushed through a cheap production and then forced to have a Vita port that would be cross-buy and cross-play compatible. Well, not cross-play, but cross-progression compatible, so that the game would work on both platforms. That was a last-minute change, from what I understand, so they had to make a whole port in a few months. And then the problem then was that the Vita port was too big, and therefore the final level they had planned, which would be, I don't want to spoil it, but the cliffhanger that Sly 4 ends on was not supposed to be a cliffhanger. There was one level after that Sony then suggested, okay, it won't fit on the Vita cartridges or the size too big or whatever it was. Make it DLC, and then Sly 4 didn't sell well because they released it in 2013, right? The Last of Us, and this PS2-looking fucking game came out and just bombed because Sly has never sold all that well. Sony then canceled that DLC. So Sly has been stuck on a cliffhanger for the last 8 years. So I will not restrain from criticizing them rightfully for that era, but I will say I find that era important because it taught them the importance of having a unified brand. You can see during the PS4 era that the cogs really started turning and they started learning these things, and they established PlayStation Studios as a Marvel-esque entity, where if you buy one PlayStation Studios game, you are liable to enjoy the other ones, and you know that because they're a trusted brand. And that's led to things like all these crossover cameos between all the other Sony properties, references on Twitter where Sucker Punch draws some really cute art when The Last of Us comes out, or vice versa, or whatever it might be. You see this tightly knit community of studios working together and truly seemingly being friends as much as corporate entities can be friends. And that makes you want to get involved and play these games when they each come out, and it elevates the PlayStation brand in the way that Nintendo is a viable brand. Even if you don't know what a Splatoon is, you know that you can trust it because Nintendo made it, and therefore when you play it, you're buying it, so that works. You can guarantee success, and B, you know that you're going to get a certain level of quality. So, as bad as the PS3 era was, I would give it a scale of like a 2, probably, on a scale of 1 to Clank is a robot. It's pretty cool. It was important because that led to the PS4 era and the era that we're in now, for as many faults as Sony continues to have. Jumping back to AEW, he had another question that I don't want to spend too long on, because again, I will go for an hour. I think I'm already 20 minutes, give or take. What are my thoughts regarding the amount of time that you play a game, the actual gameplay sections, versus the amount of time that you're watching the story? So Mario games don't have much story. Metal Gear can have 2 hours of cutscene before you get back to gameplay. To answer that question, as simple as I can, I recently played Yakuza 4. As a way of managing burnout, I decided that after I finished Tools, I hadn't really played a game since Rift Apart. I hadn't played a new game because I'd been so busy in production after production after production after production on all these videos that I was making. And so I went back and I played Ghost of Tsushima's DLC that had just come out. I played Final Fantasy Intergrade, which came out right around the same time as Rift Apart, and I hadn't had a chance to get more than 10 minutes into it. And then I went and played Yakuza 4, because those games are a really good unwind weekend kind of game for me, where I'll just blast through it over the course of a few days, and then I'm refreshed and ready. And Yakuza is, almost more so than Metal Gear, known for having such lengthy cutscenes that you're watching a movie as much as you're playing a game. And the reason I mention Yakuza is that flow is the most important concept to me, I think, I've realized as far as games go. So I got criticism in my Rift Apart review from players and viewers that maybe hadn't watched a lot of my other videos, or any of them, before or since, that how dare I call it the strongest Ratchet and Clank game to date. And I maybe didn't put enough emphasis on strongest, not necessarily best, strongest. I played that game for 16 straight hours. I got my code from Sony at about 11 a.m. I played that game until about 5 a.m. I went to sleep, I woke up, I made the review, I played it again. I have never gone that unimpeded in a game ever before. And there are times where I've been hooked, but I've never been that hooked. So I frankly don't care if the story of something like Rift Apart is not up to certain people's standards, because I was invested in the story enough, and I was invested in the excellent gameplay loop more so that, you know, as much as I'm going to have critiques and criticisms when I cover that game in full, you know, probably June of next year, all of that falls away because I'm so in love with how that game just gets me hooked. And Yakuza 1 and 2 especially, and Judgment as well, were that way. I don't care whether I'm watching an hour of cutscenes straight in Yakuza because I'm so enthralled with the melodrama and the twists and the turns, excuse me, and all of it. And I can just play those games constantly. It's so hooked that I won't do any side content. I need to see what happens. And that is the sign of an excellently paced, excellently flowing game. I don't care if I'm invested in the flow from a gameplay perspective or from a story perspective, as long as I'm in that flow state, for lack of a better, more diverse term for that. You know, in this hyper distracted society that we are currently in, if you can get players to not look at their phone, to just sit in your world, and you can build that world in, and you get people just hooked that they lose track of time, there is no greater compliment I can give to a game than I lost track of time. And Yakuza 4 kind of struggled with that for me because it had those long cutscenes, but it didn't very much earn those cutscenes in length, and it kind of lost me narratively in a way that the first two did not, nor did Judgment. So that's all to say, flow is more important than the density or the amount of cutscene or story or how it's distributed. As long as it's distributed in such a way that I'm flowing through it seamlessly, I don't care. I just don't care. So hopefully that answered your question. I have two more, and I'm going to say one more time. Here's one here that I don't want to go into too much detail on. It's from Vincent, asking, why is there so much hate or dislike, in my opinion, surrounding the Ratchet and Clank movie and the PS4 game? The movie is because it's deserved. Not a good movie. I think a lot of people aren't critical enough of the movie. They just talk about how Ratchet's a bad character and he's boring and how it's not really what Ratchet and Clank should be. And that's all true, but I think people don't go far enough into analyzing why that movie is so problematic. And it's because it hurt the game so much more than anybody seems to let on. That movie was produced by Rainmaker Entertainment and Blockade, two Canadian companies that Sony Pictures offset the IP to instead of making the film themselves. The reason they did that, I can almost guarantee you, I am confident and adamant that this is the case, is because they did not want the risk, and they knew that if they offshot it to a Canadian studio that could make these movies for cheap, they could turn a better profit on what was probably a low-grossing movie. That it would never, go gangbusters, it would not break out like a Sonic movie eventually would, pre-COVID, ending the world. And they also knew that by offshooting it to a Canadian studio, that studio could get Canadian film grants to subsidize the cost of the movie. I have friends in the YouTube sphere that have gotten Canadian film grants for YouTube videos, so I know for a fact that Rainmaker and director / whoever he is at Rainmaker itself, Kevin Monroe, has those connections in place that he can get those grants, and he can make a quick and dirty movie as cheaply as possible. That movie's budget was somewhere in the vein of $25 million, maybe $28 million. We haven't exactly gotten a full portrayal of it, but we know that it and the video game, combined are $40 million in total budget. And I have read, and I have not been able to find this source in a while, but I had read from a reputable source that the game's budget was either $12 to $15 million, therefore $25 the movie. As for the game, the simplest answer I can give is that we are in a very small minority of players that actively discuss and have discourse about these sorts of games at a larger and deeper level. And that, by its nature, will skew our perception of what is actually the case. There are a lot of people that don't like the game. That is very true. Those players are predominantly players that are in this tightly knit community of people that talk about these games constantly. And if you go into the wider gaming community, if you were able to do that at a large scale level, you would see that most players that played Ratchet and Clank PS4 liked it and moved on. Or they didn't like it and moved on. They don't talk about it. We don't really know. But, reception was positive from critics. Reception was positive in the online forums and the discords and communities when the game came out for about a year. There were people that had criticisms, but it was generally, this is a good Sonic Generations anniversary game kind of thing. That's how I always saw it. It was the 15th anniversary game a year early. And now that I know what I know, that game was made in 10 months and rushed out due to production issues, thanks to the movie's production being such a fucking disaster. While Insomniac was also working on Spider-Man as of 2014. They didn't have time to denote a huge team to the project, but they knew they wanted to make a Ratchet and Clank game. They wanted to do it with the low budget they had, with the small team that they had that wasn't dedicated to working on Spider-Man, a game that would end up breaking all of their records. But then, for the record, Ratchet PS4 was supposedly, according to James Stevenson, the community director at Insomniac, was the highest grossing, highest selling, most successful game that Insomniac had ever made. In the 2 years that it was out before Spider-Man came out, Ratchet and Clank PS4 sold somewhere between 4.5 and 5 million copies. If it's their most successful game, it sold more than Spyro, which was around 4-ish million copies. And that's before it hit PS Plus in 2018, where once it hit PS Plus, millions more people downloaded it. And you can see that on the trophy listing. You can see that 1/3 of players never got to level 2 in Ratchet PS. 1/3 never got the trophy for saving the plumber and finishing Nivalis. 1/3. I think it's 23.8% or 28.2%. I don't have the exact number in my head. Fewer than 30% of players beat that game. You look at Rift Apart, 51% of players have beaten that game that we know has sold between 1 and 2 million copies already the last few months. So, you can tell that perception will forever be skewed because PS Plus means that, you could use that as part of the narrative saying, oh, not many people even finished the game, it was so bad. You could say that. You'd be wrong, but you could say that. But anyway, what it really comes down to is the people that like a game like it and they move on. People that don't like a game generally just don't like it and move on. The people that vehemently dislike a game will hang on to those memories. They will remember them. They will talk about them. They will continue to discuss them in almost an underdog way because they feel unheard because the consensus does not agree with them. And so they become this vocal chunk. I don't want to say vocal minority, but that's for all intents and purposes what it is. And then once they get an outlet with which to discuss that further, they leap on that. So I don't talk about Ratchet PS4 all that much because the moment you do, there's going to be someone in the Twitch chat or in the comments that says, that game's a piece of dog shit. I hate that game. Insomniac's awful. I hate them. They fucked my wife. And most people don't want to deal with that because it's toxic. It's not, oh, I didn't like that game, but I'm glad you do. It's specifically, here's my manifesto as to why that game is bad. And it's just like, dude, I like the game. That's it. You don't need to, I don't want to talk about it in that detail. I just said, hey, game's pretty all right. That's it. It's not a hot take. It's a well-reviewed game. And so you see, again, the discourse shift where only the negative people left will talk about it because all the positive or the neutral people don't want to deal with the stress of talking to a bunch of assholes. And, there are a lot of people that are just genuinely, oh, you don't like it, that's cool, whatever. But that's not the people I'm talking about. So, I'm already at 30 minutes. Good God. Well, patreon.com/thegoldenbolt. You'll get an essay out of me every time you ask a question. That's the gist of it, and there are other factors as well. negativity does better within the algorithms of Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and all of these social media platforms. So it's a lot easier for a negative video to spread than a positive one. That's part of the reason I even started this series of videos in general, was that I wanted to uplift the games that I like. You know, I once had a plan to make a video demolishing, shitting all over a game like Jak 2. And I realized that doesn't accomplish anything. What does that do if I just say this game is bad and here's why it's completely bad? You're just going to upset people who liked the game and get people who will then take that video and share that video as their opinion as to why the video is bad. And if you're that kind of person, I want to make it clear, I don't want you to use my video as a justification for your opinions. If my video and my opinions and my analysis gives you a new perspective and it changes your stance on a thing, that's the point of discussion. You can do the same backwards to me. It's happened many times in the comments of my videos. I make these to have a discussion. What I don't want is those words that I say to be used verbatim as somebody else's belief. Because that feels too reductive for the conversations that many of us will be having about these dumb video games that don't matter. And that's another long-winded answer for that question. I'm sure I will get into that down the road when I cover the PS4 game in a much more scripted, well-presented fashion than the ramblings of a madman. And speaking of, the last question here is from James Boss, which he had asked, why do I hate Sonic Adventure 2? I don't hate it, I just don't care for it much. I don't see what a lot of people see in that game, and maybe down the road I will try to teach myself to appreciate that game in the way that others do, because I do want to be involved in that discourse. I want to see the love that people have for all these games that maybe either I don't see or that I've never played. I want to share that appreciation of others, not just with myself, but with you. And so, you know, maybe that'll be a thing I do with Sonic Adventure 2 down the road. Who knows? My next video might lead us there at some point down the road. That's where I'm going to call it for now. I think that's every question that we got through. If you do have questions and you would like to ask them about anything of the sort and you want to hear my full rambly thoughts about them, again, it's patreon.com/thegoldenbolt for as little as $1. And you'll get access to these threads as I post them monthly, most likely. You'll get access to videos before they come out. You'll get access to the Discord server where you can chat with me about this stuff most days of the week. But if you can't or don't want to support, again, totally cool. But, you know, this is how the sausage is made. This is how we do it here on YouTube. So I have to do it. I will see you folks relatively soon for the next video. I have that hopefully out. I would like to have that out in the next 2-ish weeks. So follow me on Twitch as well if you want to catch streams live. And subscribe to the second channel if you would like some other dumb shit that I'll put together and throw in bonuses, whatnot. Or don't. Well, as always, until the next video or the next time I see you, stay golden.